Good morning, delegates. I'm enjoying this conference. How about you? Wow, such great information. Again, to Dr. Antoinette Bassan, myself, and the rest of the team, what an awesome effort. And I've been speaking to Dr. Bassan earlier on. I said, we've got to do this next year. Got to do it next year again, bigger and better. How many of you agree, just by a show of hands? Bigger and better. Next year in Cape Town. Next year in Cape Town. So I want to start up my talk by asking you this question. Are you outraged by what you just heard and saw? Are you? Because, you know, outrage motivates us to action. You know, if we outrage and we just remain outraged and we do nothing about it, that is pointless. Now, Sharon Slater is an excellent example of a mother of, how many children, Sharon? 7 children. An ordinary housewife, mother of 7 children, that said, I'm going to do something. And today we have Family Watch International impacting NGOs and organizations throughout the entire world. A housewife and a mother, Sharon Slater. My wife and I had the privilege of bumping into this lady in, I think, 2014 or 2015. We've met in so many different cities around the world. I just can't remember whether it was Spain. I remember the time we met in Moscow in Russia at a big family event, and Sharon came to my wife and I and she said, can you go with me to Geneva? We've got to do some work at the Human Rights Commission. I was thinking, what? We don't just jump on planes and fly to Geneva, but that's what she does. And we were exposed to the passion and the commitment of Sharon Slater from that day and after that at various World Congress. We partner members of the World Congress of Families, and we meet at these events around the world. And I remember at one of these events, Sharon Slater did a presentation on comprehensive sexuality education. Now, we haven't heard about it. At that stage, we knew nothing about it. She's doing this presentation, and she's talking about South Africa being one of the leading nations that signed on to this thing and pushing this agenda, and we're sitting there and we say, hey, we South African. We South African, and we know nothing about it. And that triggered and piqued our interest, obviously. I was horrified by what I heard, came back and began to do some digging and investigation and found out that our government signed on to CESE at a meeting in Cape Town in 2013. And by that time, it was 2015. I think the presentation was in Salt Lake City, Utah, at an international organization for family training event. And the reason we were so horrified, my wife and I have 3 children, we have 3 grandchildren, and the first thing you do is think about your children, right? All of you. First thing, your mind goes to your children, and then you think about other children. And that's what got me going. We started speaking up as Family Policy Institute. We started doing work and speaking up against CESE, and investigating this, and was horrified to find that our government, our Department of Education, is not in control of sexuality education in our country, in South Africa. UNESCO is, a UN agency. And when Tuesday I mentioned that our government leaders always say this, we need African solutions for African problems. But yet they import it from International Planned Parenthood of South Africa and sexual rights groups, sexuality education, and UNESCO is controlling the entire agenda, not our government or our people. They're putting all the funding into it, not only South Africa now, in many African nations. And when I discovered that, I thought, boy, are we in trouble, because you know what is happening? Our government has sold out our children to faceless and nameless people. Foreigners are controlling our children in our countries. And what gets me is We can't get parents in this country outraged enough to push back against this. People are kind of uninterested. Even the church. Even the church leaders, you can't get them interested. You've got to grab them and shake them by the lapels and tell you, wake up! They're targeting our children. They're perverting our children. Imagine what the next generation is going to be like. In this country, we've got so much sexual exploitation and abuse of women. If we're raising children on a steady diet of this, can you imagine the next generation? If we don't intervene. So Sharon has been steadily sending me information, and I was privileged and honored to participate in their documentary, The War on Children. We shot that in America while I was there. I spoke on behalf of South Africa. And I'm so thankful and grateful for the work of Sharon Slater, Annie, and the team at Family Watch International, because without them, we wouldn't have this information. And a commitment to Africa is off the charts, because she has these Zoom meetings. She's flying in and out to African nations, sharing this information. And we don't get the same level of commitment and passion from African leaders as we do from a housewife from the United States of America. Isn't that incredible? Isn't that remarkable? Every parent, every church leader, every responsible, decent person in South Africa and every African nation should be standing up and screaming and saying, no ways! We reject this with everything we have. This is our children. We're not hearing that. Not yet. We had a march to Parliament. Thousands of people. We handed over 150,000 signatures that said no to CESE to a representative of the Department of Education in 2019 or 2018, I can't remember. We had people writing to our Sharon has sent me so many wonderful documents giving critical research-based information about the harms of CESE and why our government must not implement it. I wrote to our President, Cyril Ramaphosa. I wrote to our Department of Education, our Minister of Basic Education, Angie Motshekga. I wrote to everybody I could write to. And I got leaders of Christian denominations to co-sign those documents. We were ignored. We ignored because they're not in control. UNESCO is. And when they had this consultation in 2020, January 2020, here in Pretoria, with religious leaders to consult, to talk about their concerns with CESE, it was one of the worst mockeries of the concerns of people and religious leaders that I've ever seen in my life. Do you know they set that whole thing up? The Department of Education and UNESCO, who was controlling the whole thing, they invited leaders. They made sure that only half the room, they wouldn't allow all the leaders that applied, so certain leaders they got in. And then they filled the room with young people. And they said, no, they want the religious leaders to interact with the young people. You know what the young people were? They were plants trained by UNESCO. And when the Christian leaders stood up, I was sitting in the room and spoke about their concerns with the masturbation and all these things that they're training children, LGBT and all of that. They got young people to stand up and start attacking the Christian leaders and talk about this one pastor that raped this woman and another pastor that did this, and so began to undermine the religious leaders' voice by getting plants in the room to attack, vilify and demonize the religious leaders. And most of them sitting in the room were decent, good people. They're doing hard work and genuinely concerned, but they had to attack them and undermine them. So the thing turned into a farce, and we could see the government of this country that stands up for human rights and dignity and all those things they repeatedly say, they set this whole thing up. They don't care about what you think. They don't care about parents. Because CESE is designed to bypass parents to get to the children, to indoctrinate children. They're pushing the parents out of the way. Increasingly, you see that. They want your children to hell with you. That message comes across over and over again. It's the most diabolical, insidious, mind-boggling thing I've ever come across. You've seen it. You've seen it. We've been fighting it for long now. Almost 7 years with Sharon's help. If we didn't have Sharon's help, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. Because whenever we need information, Sharon Slater, contact her. She used to be in Phoenix. She's now in Salt Lake City, Utah. She's moved recently. Once Sharon invited me to come up to Phoenix. My wife and I flew within 2 weeks' time to get up there to address ambassadors, UN ambassadors, to interact, to speak, to train. The commitment is incredible. What I hope to see, what I pray for, is the same level of commitment in this country from our people. I don't see it, not yet. So, there's a lady by the name of Dr. Darlene Edwards-Meyer. We got together in Durban just before the lockdown, March 2020, and we discussed with educators about how we can produce an alternative to CSE, sexuality education, but from a sound basis, value basis, common sense, that will really educate and equip children to make good choices about their sexuality. And through 2 years of working, and we came up with Smart Choices. Smart Choices is a great alternative to CSE. And you know what? Any school can reject CSE and select Smart Choices for the school if the parents contact the school governing body and say, we want that, we don't want CSE. So it's up to the parents. And so all of the work we're doing is getting this information to parents. And Minister of Basic Education on television, parliamentary television, confirmed that CSE is not compulsory. Schools are not compelled to take it. So in other words, if the school governing body say we don't want CSE because the parents of the children say we don't want our children exposed to that, we want Smart Choices, then that's what they must take. And they set up to train those people. And this is how we keep out CSE. But you know what? We can't get the interest of the church, and we can't get the interest of parents. I don't know what it is, and I don't know what more to do. And this thing is so diabolical, it's so wicked. And it's targeting children at such young ages. You think there would be a massive kind of uprising in the country. We're not getting it, and I don't understand why. I don't understand why. Because you pervert millions and millions of children with this garbage. Can you imagine the next generation, what this country is going to look like? You think we've got a problem with sexual abuse and teen pregnancies and violence against women? You think you've got a problem now? If this continues, can you imagine if we don't stop it? And you know, most people in this country oppose these kind of things. The vast majority of people don't agree with us. But the vast majority are silent and apathetic and inactive. The silent majority. We've got to get the silent majority to be the vocal majority. That's what we need to do. And you're the kind of people that can help us do that. So I want to ask, Sharon, would you come up here? I want to ask you a few questions. And maybe you can just help us understand this thing more fully. So, Sharon, firstly, again, I want to thank you. You are a hero to my wife and I. You've always been, since the day we met you. Not for any other reason, just because of your commitment to South Africa and Africa. All the work you've done. Everything you do to help us protect our children.
Well, I would say I feel the same way about you and your wife. I know that you have the same level of commitment anytime we've ever needed anything, anytime we've needed support, we've needed representation from Africa or from South Africa. You and your wife have an amazing commitment, so I thank you for that.
Thank you. So, Sharon, you know, I found out about CSE and its objectives and agenda at a World Congress of Families in the United States of America. I didn't find anything in South Africa. And a lot of people in South Africa and across Africa, when you meet people, they don't seem to know anything about what do you think that is?
because it's a hidden agenda. I've watched the strategies that they use. Like, you notice that framework that I presented? A lot of times they'll present a framework with these very nice sounding words, like we're going to learn about anatomy and physiology. They don't know that that means the curriculum that's attached to it is they're going to teach them how to sexually stimulate different parts of the bodies and how that anatomy works and, you know, the sexual responses. And so it's just through words, and that's why we're going to do, during our training, we're going to talk a lot about the terms that are used very, very deceptively to advance comprehensive sexuality education.
And just put that. Yeah. What do you think is the key reason UNESCO and other UN agencies and International Planned Parenthood Federation have been so successful in getting CSE into African nations, into their schooling systems? Now, we've got to consider this, that these kind of behaviors is taboo in African culture. This is not part of African culture. It's not what Africans love to do, and we don't think this is acceptable, right? So people ask me this when I travel to other parts of the country. They ask me, why is the South African government, which is a black African government, so happy to promote all these kind of things? Because this is not part of African culture. Why are they grabbing on this? Maybe can you answer that?
Well, I don't think it's the African governments that are grabbing onto it. It's done by bribery, blackmail. You know, we've talked to a number of ministers of education who say, help us. They fund everything for us. If we don't accept this sexuality education, then what are we going to do? Where are we going to go? You know, they'll buy them. You know, I've seen UNICEF Jeeps that they bought for the, you know, officials, and, you know, everything's funded by them. So it's money. It's money.
So, yeah. So the carrot is money, but again, it's the people, it's the NGOs. I think, you know, my estimation, and you maybe can add on to this, is that the NGOs in countries are key. The NGOs are key because they are the ones at the sort of grassroots level getting information to people governments are failing to do. And if the NGOs take this up and drive this agenda, we can stop it, even though government is trying to, and they haven't been successful in convincing people that CESE is good for children. They're using all kinds of other methodology, and again, that most people are unaware and don't know. So it's the keep them stupid, right? So I think the success for us is we can get this information, use NGOs to parents, to educators around the country. We can begin to start turning this around.
Is that working?
Yeah.
Okay. I would say the number one tool or success that we have is simply just finding the curriculum. The first thing you have to do is go to your children's school. Go ask the teacher. Go find the manual. The biggest secret is the manual. Do you remember that event you said where you learned that your government had signed on in Cape Town? You had a picture of all these ministers raising, you know, the agreement that they all signed, and they're all excited that the agreement said something like, whereas comprehensive sexuality education will prevent STDs, teen pregnancy, solve gender-based violence, you know, solve poverty, it'll even help with climate change. I mean, it's really gender-based, it'll solve every world problem. So that's very, very alluring, but they never show them the manual. So if we can find the manuals, that's how we've been able to stop it. You know, they think we have all this money and, you know, because we've been able to stop it in so many countries. And our team is going to talk to you about how we've done that and how you can organize more here in South Africa and other countries. Because a good parent who just simply speaks out, a lot of times can stop the whole program.
And you're a great example of that. A good parent speaking out and impacting continents. Sharon Slater. Tell us about Kebele in Swaziland. She trained me to pronounce her name, and Sharon struggles. Kebele? From Swaziland, yes.
Kebele, yes. Kebele is a wonderful person. And she had been a supporter of comprehensive sexuality education, the sexual reproductive health and rights agenda in Swaziland. I didn't know her. It was formerly Swaziland, now Eswatini. And She told me when I met her that she had been criticizing her government because her government had learned how bad comprehensive sexuality education was. They were taking a big stand at the United Nations, and the diplomat representing Swaziland played a huge role in getting the whole African voting bloc to oppose it. And Kevali had been criticizing this diplomat and her government, saying, you know, we've got to promote comprehensive sexuality education, until she said she heard your program, your TV program. She says she remembers where she was. She stopped. She heard my voice talking about what this really was, what was inside the comprehensive sexuality education. And I've had a number of people tell me something similar. It's like she had this thought, like, I knew something was wrong. I knew something was not quite right with this agenda, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I couldn't articulate it. And when I heard you speak and say, this is what it is, and this is what it contains, it changed her life. And she now is one of our most stalwart leaders. She's helping to raise awareness with their government, her Ministry of Education, with parliamentarians, and she's awesome. And I would say, and just learning what it is, right?
Yeah. So the information that Sharon shares, and now by implication I share, getting the information from her, it's helping people. It's helping to switch on people. It's helping to create activists against CSE, and we're hoping it's going to do the same for you. Now, I remember Sharon's also the president of the UN Family Rights Caucus, and she works a lot at the United Nations. My wife and I have been up there many times. I remember Annie hosted us once at the UN. But I applied in 2015, I think. Shannon encouraged me to apply for special consultative status at the United Nations as Family Policy Institute.
And Annie's going to, during the later training, she's going to tell you how you can do the same. Any of your organizations can be a part of the effort to stop these agendas at the UN.
Yeah, and so because Shannon's encouragement, I applied. There's a whole lot of documents that you have to kind of fill in online, and I applied in 2015. Every year, they would look at my application and defer it to the next year. It went on like that for 5 years. Then they asked for additional information. And I thought, I'm never going to get this special consultative status. But something in me, must be the Spirit of God, that said, just keep on. And in 2019, I got invited to speak at the United Nations. It was a special event held for the International Day of the Family, which is every year, 15th of May. Sharon was there, a number of organizations was there, and I represented Africa. I was so honored and privileged. A number of nations there. That time, it was under the Trump administration, so the US representative there, the Russian representative there, was all kinds of representatives from different nations. And we were speaking about the importance of family, the role of the family. I spoke about the strength and the role of the family in Africa, how important Africa is. At that event, well, I was there, I think it was the 15th of May. My wife's birthday is on the 20th of May, so I said, let's stay till the 20th and celebrate your birthday. We just, in New York, and then we'll go back home. And every year they would send me additional questions about my application, and so while I was there, a thought just came in my head, and I said, I'm going to email them and tell them, I'm right here in New York. Can I make a presentation to the committee while I'm here? They sent me an email back and said, sorry, it's full. These things are planned 3 months in advance. We've got all our speakers. There's no way we can do that. So my wife and I prayed. This is when our backs are against the wall. This is what we do. We pray. So we pray. And we ask God to make a way where there is no way. The following day, I get another email from them and say, you know what? Because you're here and you're leaving on the 20th, on the 19th, you can come in. When we finish our session, we're going to ask everybody to say a half an hour late in addition, so that you can come make your presentation. How's that? The entire UN, that whole committee stayed with all the nations represented there. They stayed a half an hour extra. They all agreed to do that so that I could come in and no, it was on the 20th. It was on my wife's birthday. That's why I remember it. See, my wife is my lucky charm. She's my blessing in everything. So I go in. At 5. At the end of the session, they're all staying now, and they ask me questions. I go up, I do my presentation, and different nations ask me questions. Oh, it's the most harrowing experience to sit in the UN and have all these people ask you questions. And I answered, and I just prayed, and I left. And my wife and I went, and we celebrated a birthday at Panda Express in New York City, and the next day we flew out. And you know what? I finally got my special consultative status as a result of being there at that time. What I'm saying is, God is good. There's things that you think you cannot do and you're not capable of doing. You just think that. But when you step out and say, I don't know, but I'm going to just do this. I'm going to step out in faith and I'm going to do this. And it's incredible what happens. The doors that begin to open. If you won't give up, you're determined, you're resolute. It's amazing what God does in that. We're a small organization.
Could I give an example of that?
Okay.
So, you heard that we adopted those 3 children. And when they first came, my oldest, he was 15 years old because it took a long time to get them. And I brought him to the United Nations. He barely spoke English. And there was a provision that was being pushed on HIV/AIDS. And it was trying to recognize a document that calls for the legalization of prostitution, same-sex marriage and abortion, and all this sexuality education as the answer to AIDS, right? That was horrible, horrible. And, he was passionate. He wanted to stop this. I sent him a little paper. He went in. They didn't know he wasn't a delegate, so he went into the African voting bloc. He showed them what was in the document because it was being done by deception. And this orphan, who barely spoke English, stopped that whole document for the whole world. And
wow.
The voting bloc stopped it. There is so much you can do by just going to the UN, even one person with just a little information. And if you want to come, you'll learn more from Annie about how to do that and what we do. We help support you and teach you what to do and how to be effective.
Yeah. And we can testify to that, my wife and I. We've really been empowered and educated. Our ministry, we just stepped out and do things we never ever imagined we would do because of the help of people like Sharon and Dawn Hawkins. We've been to all her international summits, connecting with these people. But the encouragement I want to give you and I want to leave you with is that don't limit yourself. Look at these things and say, God, I want to do something. I want to stop this. Whatever I can do. The gifts and talents you have in you sometimes are lying dormant and you don't realize it's there. Same like me. I'm not a highly educated person, but I'm a passionate person, and God works with that. That's enough. You put your little in His hands, incredible what He can do with it. It's the same for all of you. I want to do more than you ever imagined. Just dream, take a risk, do these things, because it's the time to do that now. It is so dangerous. It is so critical in our nation and the nations of the world at the moment. The number of agendas that is being pushed, they're redefining marriage in our nation, South Africa. Marriage is going to be redefined. No more a union between a man and a woman. It's going to be anything goes. They're pushing to decriminalize prostitution. There's hate crimes bills being pushed through our parliament that's going to criminalize the Bible. In certain things you won't be able to teach or preach or say anything. All of these things are happening, so we need the good people like you. And I look at this room and I'm thinking, just this room, just the people in this room, yeah, now we can change this nation. God doesn't need a majority. You and God, you're a majority. Never mind, you're standing in a room with 10,000 people, you're always a majority. I believe that. I step out in faith. We do incredible things, not because of our skills and our talents, our great education. It's just because we prepared. We say, God, we're going to do it, we're going to thrive, we're going to step out there, and often we have the victory. So once again, Sharon Slater, thank you for everything you do for Africa. We appreciate you, we love you, you and your team, your family, and we look forward to your training.
Thank you so much.